The gathering hall was dark and cold, as all Kethari buildings were. The young cadets sat in perfect rows, their hard shells gleaming under the pale blue lights that hung from the ceiling. They were the best of their generation, chosen from thousands to serve in the great fleets of the Galactic Hegemony. They were proud. They were confident. They believed they were ready for anything. They were wrong. At the front of the hall stood an old warrior named Torvax. His carapace was not gleaming like theirs. It was dull and cracked, covered with scars that told stories of battles fought long ago. One of his forearms was missing below the elbow, replaced with a mechanical limb that clicked softly when he moved. His eyes, once bright yellow, had faded to a tired amber color. The cadets looked at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They had heard his name before. Torvax the Survivor, some called him. Others called him Torvax the Broken. He had fought in more battles than most of them could count, and he had lived through things that would have killed warriors twice his size. Their instructor, a younger officer named Velkath, stepped forward and raised one of his arms for silence. The hall, already quiet, became completely still. "Today you will hear from one who has seen the face of war," Velkath said. "Listen carefully. Learn from his experience. What he tells you may one day save your lives." Velkath stepped back and Torvax moved slowly to the center of the raised platform. He looked out at the young faces before him, and something like sadness crossed his features. "You think you are ready," he said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "You have trained for years. You have studied tactics and strategy. You have learned to use weapons that can destroy cities. You believe that when the time comes, you will be brave and strong and victorious." He paused, letting his words settle over them like a cold fog. "I thought the same thing once. I was young like you. I was proud like you. I believed that the hegemony was the greatest power in the galaxy, and that nothing could stand against us." Torvax began to walk slowly across the platform, his mechanical arm clicking with each step. "I was assigned to the Third Strike Fleet when news came of a new species at the edge of known space. They called themselves humans. They came from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, and they had just begun to spread to nearby systems." One of the cadets raised his arm. Torvax nodded at him. "Sir, I have read about the humans in our history texts. They are listed as a minor species, not a significant threat." Torvax stared at the young cadet for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Minor species," he repeated. "Not a significant threat. Yes, that is what our leaders thought as well. That is what they told us when they sent us to bring the humans under hegemony control." He turned away from the cadet and looked out at the rest of them. The humans had technology far behind our own. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. Their weapons were primitive. They had no shields worth mentioning, no faster-than-light communication, no experience fighting wars across star systems. By every measure we used, they should have been easy to conquer. We had defeated species far more advanced. What could these soft, fragile creatures possibly do against us? Torvax stopped walking. He stood perfectly still, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Everything." They did everything. The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The confidence they had walked in with was beginning to crack. "I need you to understand something," Torvax continued. "The humans do not look dangerous. They have no claws, no shells, no venom. They cannot see in the dark like we can. They cannot survive in vacuum without protection. They need to eat and drink constantly, and they must sleep for a third of every day. Their bodies break easily, and they heal slowly." He held up his remaining natural arm, showing the thick armored shell that covered it. "One of us is worth 10 of them in single combat. Our ships were faster, stronger, better armed. Our soldiers were trained from birth for war. Everything about us was superior. Torvax lowered his arm, and none of it mattered. He began walking again, his pace slow and measured. When we arrived at their first colony world, we expected them to surrender. That is what sensible species do when faced with overwhelming force. They negotiate. They submit. They survive. It is the logical choice. The old warrior shook his head. The humans are not logical. Or perhaps they follow a logic we cannot understand. When our fleet appeared in their sky and demanded their surrender, they did not negotiate. They did not submit. They sent us a message, just 4 words. Come and take it. Several cadets exchanged confused looks. Torvax noticed and explained. It is an old human phrase. It comes from their ancient history, from a time when a small group of their warriors faced an army many times their size. They knew they would die. They chose to fight anyway. He stopped again and faced the cadets directly. That is what you must understand about humans. They know when they are going to die. They understand the odds. They can calculate their chances of survival just as well as we can. And they choose to fight anyway. Not because they think they will win, but because they refuse to lose without trying. Torvax's voice grew heavier. We thought this was stupidity. We thought they simply did not understand the situation. So we attacked, confident that once they saw our power, they would surrender. He was quiet for a moment. The battle lasted 6 hours. We won, of course. We took their colony, but we lost 3 ships doing it. 3 warships, destroyed by a species that had been traveling between stars for less than a century. Our commanders were shocked. They had expected losses measured in single fighters, not capital ships. Torvax turned and walked to the edge of the platform. And that was just the beginning. That was before we learned what humans were truly capable of. That was before we understood why every species that has fought them has learned the same terrible lesson. He looked back at the cadets, and his amber eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Never push a human into a corner. Never give them no choice but to fight. Because when humans have nothing left to lose, they become something else entirely. They become a force that cannot be stopped, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be survived. Torvax, let the silence stretch. I am going to tell you stories from my time in the war. I am going to tell you things that will give you nightmares. And when I am finished, you will understand why the hegemony, the greatest military power in the known galaxy, chose to make peace with a species we could have crushed. He sat down heavily on the edge of the platform, suddenly looking very old and very tired. Listen carefully, young ones. What I tell you may be the most important thing you ever learn. Torvax settled himself on the platform and looked out at the young cadets. Their earlier confidence had been replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps the beginning of fear. My first real battle against the humans was at a place they called Kepler Station, he began. It was a small outpost, built inside a hollowed asteroid at the edge of their territory. Our intelligence told us there were perhaps 200 humans living there, along with a handful of patrol ships barely worth noticing. He gestured with his mechanical arm, and a holographic image appeared in the air above him. It showed a rough gray asteroid with lights glowing from windows carved into its surface. Our fleet arrived with 40 warships, 40, against 200 people and a few old patrol craft. Our commander, a proud fool named Zethoval, was certain we would be home within a day. He planned to add this victory to his list of conquests and receive another medal for his collection. Torvax's voice grew bitter. Zethoval sent the standard message. Surrender immediately, and your lives will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed. It was the same message we had sent to a dozen other species. It had always worked before. The hologram changed to show a human face. A woman with short dark hair and tired eyes, wearing a uniform that had seen better days. This is Lieutenant Katie Morgan. She was the commander of Kepler Station. She was 31 years old. She had a daughter back on Earth who she had not seen in 2 years. And when she received our surrender demand, she looked directly into the camera and said 5 words that I will never forget. Torvax paused. She said, "You are welcome to try." Some of the cadets made sounds of disbelief. Torvax nodded slowly. We thought she was insane. Or perhaps she did not understand how badly outnumbered she was. Zeffel was insulted. He ordered the attack to begin immediately. The hologram shifted again, showing the battle formation of the hegemony fleet approaching the station. What happened next should have been simple. Our ships moved in, weapons ready. The station had no real defenses. A few gun platforms, some missile launchers, nothing that could threaten a proper warship. We expected the battle to last perhaps an hour. Torvax made that humorless laughing sound again. 3 weeks. The siege lasted 3 weeks. And every single day, we paid for our confidence in blood. He stood up and began pacing again. The humans had prepared for us. They knew they could not win a straight fight, so they did not fight straight. They had hidden weapons in the asteroid field around the station. Small platforms, almost invisible to our sensors, loaded with missiles and mines. Our ships began taking damage before we even got close. The hologram showed hegemony vessels exploding as hidden weapons found their targets. But that was only the beginning. When our boarding parties finally reached the station, they found something worse. The humans had turned every corridor into a death trap. They had rigged doors to explode. They had removed floor panels to create pits filled with metal spikes. They had filled entire sections with poisonous gas that did nothing to them but killed us within minutes. Torvax stopped and looked directly at the cadets. Our soldiers were bigger, stronger, better armed. None of it mattered. The humans knew their station perfectly. They moved through access tunnels we did not know existed. They attacked from behind, from above, from below. They disappeared before we could respond, only to strike again somewhere else. He continued his account, his voice heavy with old memories. I remember one human in particular, a young man named Danny Ruiz. He was a pilot, maybe 25 years old. His patrol ship had been destroyed in the first hour of fighting, but somehow he survived. For 2 weeks, he lived inside the station's ventilation system, coming out only to attack our soldiers. Torvax touched a scar on his chest. He gave me this wound. He dropped out of a ceiling panel, shot 2 of my squad members, and drove a knife into my chest before I could react. I managed to throw him off, but he was gone before I could aim my weapon. Just vanished back into the walls like a ghost. The cadets were completely silent now. On the 18th day, we finally cornered him. He was out of ammunition, bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely able to stand. We had him surrounded, 20 soldiers pointing weapons at a single injured human. Torvax's voice dropped. He smiled at us. Then he pulled something from his belt. It was a detonator. He had spent his last hours rigging the entire section with explosives. He said one word, a human word I later learned means goodbye, and pressed the button. The hologram showed a section of the station erupting in fire. Danny Ruiz killed himself and 14 of our soldiers with that explosion. He had known for hours that he was going to die. He used that time to make sure he did not die alone. Torvax was quiet for a moment. That was not unusual. That was how the humans fought. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They made us pay for every room, every corridor, every meter of that station. He returned to the platform and sat down again. Lieutenant Katie Morgan was one of the last offenders. When we finally breached the command center, she was waiting for us with a weapon in each hand. She killed 3 more soldiers before we brought her down. And as she lay dying, do you know what she said? The cadets waited. She said, "My daughter will remember what you did here, and her children will remember. And one day, they will come for you." Torvax shook his head slowly. We took Kepler Station. After 3 weeks and the loss of 23 ships, we finally won. Of the 200 humans who had defended it, we captured exactly 4. The rest chose death. Some destroyed themselves. Some fought until we had no choice but to kill them. Some found ways to die that damaged us even in their final moments. He looked up at the cadets. Commander Zethoval received no medal for Kepler Station. Instead, he was quietly removed from command and never seen again. Our leaders did not want anyone to know what had really happened. They did not want anyone to know that 200 humans had nearly defeated 40 warships. Torvax stood up, his old joints creaking. But those of us who were there, we knew. We knew that something was very wrong. We knew that this war would not be the easy victory our leaders had promised. We knew that the humans were something new, something different, something we had never faced before. He gestured, and the hologram disappeared. And we knew deep in our hearts that we were afraid. For the first time in the history of the hegemony, we were afraid of an enemy we had thought would be easy to crush. Torvax let the silence hang in the air. That fear would only grow worse as the war continued. Kepler Station was just the beginning. The humans had shown us what they could do when defending a single small outpost. We had not yet seen what they could do when they decided to attack. Torvax took a moment to stretch his tired limbs before continuing. The cadets had not moved since he began speaking. Their eyes followed him like small moons orbiting a planet. After Kepler Station, our commanders believed the humans were simply fanatics, he said. They thought that humans fought so hard because of some strange belief system, some religion of war that made them willing to die. They believed that eventually, like all fanatics, the humans would break. They just needed to be pushed hard enough. He shook his head slowly. They were wrong. The humans did not fight because they believed death was glorious. They fought because they believed life was precious. Every human soldier I faced was fighting for the people they loved, the homes they had built, the futures they wanted for their children. That is why they would not surrender. Not because they did not fear death, but because they feared what would happen to their loved ones if they stopped fighting. Torvax began walking again, his mechanical arm clicking steadily. After the siege, I was transferred to a ground unit. The hegemony had decided to invade a human colony world called New Montana. It was a farming planet, mostly. Wide open plains, small towns, perhaps 500,000 people. Our commanders thought it would be easy to occupy. He made it sound like a sigh. For the first month, it seemed like they were right. Our forces landed without much resistance. The human military had retreated to the mountains, leaving the towns and farms undefended. We moved in and established our bases. We thought we had won. The hologram appeared again, showing a peaceful-looking planet with rolling green hills and distant mountain ranges. Then the attack started. Small things at first. A patrol would go missing. A supply convoy would be destroyed on a lonely road. A commander would be shot through his window by a sniper who was never found. Nothing major, but constant. Every day, something happened. Torvax's voice grew harder. We used the same tactics that had worked on other worlds. When rebels attacked, we punished the nearby civilians. We destroyed farms. We imprisoned families. We thought that if we made the cost of resistance high enough, the humans would stop fighting. He paused. Instead, they fought harder. Every punishment we delivered created more enemies. Humans who had been neutral joined the resistance. Humans who had wanted peace began planning attacks. We were not breaking their spirit. We were feeding it. One of the cadets raised an arm hesitantly. "Sir, did you not try to find their leaders?" Cut off the head of the rebellion. Torvax turned to face the cadet. We tried. We captured dozens of people we believed were leaders. We interrogated them. Some talked, some did not, but it made no difference. The humans did not need leaders. They organized themselves, formed new groups, created new plans. When we killed one commander, 3 more took their place. He continued his story. But the thing that truly frightened me about the humans was not their courage or their numbers. It was their ability to learn. The humans adapted faster than any species I had ever seen. Tactics that worked on Monday were useless by Friday. Weapons that seemed unstoppable were countered within days. Torvax gestured, and a hologram showed a series of images, hegemony weapons, vehicles, and equipment. We had scanners that could detect life signs through walls. Within a week, the humans had figured out how to block them using materials from their own farms. We had armored vehicles that could survive any human weapon. Within a month, they had built devices that could disable our engines from a distance. We had communication systems that were supposed to be unbreakable. They broke them in 3 weeks. He lowered his arm, and the hologram faded. Every advantage we had, they found a way to take it from us. Not through superior technology, but through creativity and determination. They studied us constantly, looking for weaknesses. And they always found them. Torvax moved to the center of the platform. I want to tell you about one human in particular. A resistance fighter named Marcus Cole. He was a teacher before the war. An ordinary man who taught children how to read and write. When we invaded, his school was destroyed. His students were scattered. Some were killed. The old veteran's voice softened slightly. Marcus Cole decided to fight. But he did not fight like a soldier. He fought like a teacher, patient and methodical and thorough. He watched our patrols for weeks, learning their patterns. He studied our equipment, figuring out how it worked. He talked to other resistance fighters, sharing what he learned. Torvax paused. Then he did something that no other human had done. He allowed himself to be captured. The cadets shifted in their seats. We thought we had caught an important rebel. Marcus Cole was brought to our main command base for interrogation. For 3 weeks, we questioned him. He told us many things, names and locations and plans. Our commanders were pleased. They believed they were finally breaking the resistance. Torvax shook his head. Everything he told us was false. Every name was made up. Every location was empty. Every plan was a distraction. But while we were chasing shadows, Marcus Cole was doing what he had really come to do. He was memorizing. Every corridor, every guard post, every security code, every schedule. He was mapping our entire base from the inside. The cadets leaned forward, captivated. After 3 weeks, the human resistance attacked. But this was not a random strike. They knew exactly where to go, exactly when to strike, exactly which defenses to avoid. They moved through our base like ghosts, appearing where we least expected them, vanishing before we could respond. Torvax's voice grew heavy. I was there that night. I saw Marcus Cole during the battle. He had been freed by his fellow fighters, and he was leading them through the base using the knowledge he had gathered. He was injured, weak from weeks of captivity, but he refused to leave until the mission was complete. The old veteran touched a scar on his face. The resistance destroyed our command center, killed our base commander, and freed 200 prisoners. It was the worst defeat we suffered on New Montana. And it happened because one human was willing to endure 3 weeks of captivity just to learn the layout of a building. Torvax was quiet for a moment. Marcus Cole died during the attack. He was shot while making sure the last prisoners escaped. His fellow fighters tried to save him, but he ordered them to leave him behind. His final words were instructions, telling them which routes were safe, which doors to use, which guards were in which positions. He looked at the cadets. That is what we were fighting against. Not warriors, not fanatics, not monsters. Just ordinary people who refused to give up. People who were willing to sacrifice everything for their families, their friends, their homes. Torvax sat down heavily. We occupied New Montana for almost 2 years. During that time, we lost more soldiers than we had lost in the entire conquest of the Vethari Empire. And the Vethari had twice the technology and 10 times the population of humanity. He spread his arms. Our commanders kept telling us that victory was close, that the humans were weakening, that they would surrender any day. But they never did. No matter how many we killed, no matter how many towns we destroyed, no matter how much we punished them, they never stopped fighting. Torvax looked up at the ceiling. Eventually, we had to withdraw from New Montana, not because we were defeated in battle, but because we simply could not afford to stay. Every soldier we kept on that planet was a soldier we could not use elsewhere. Every ship we used to supply our forces was a ship we could not use for other purposes. He lowered his gaze back to the cadets. The humans won by refusing to lose. They made the cost of victory higher than we were willing to pay. And that, young ones, is more terrifying than any weapon. An enemy you can outfight, you can defeat. An enemy who simply refuses to accept defeat? That enemy can only be destroyed completely or left alone. Torvax paused. We could not destroy them completely, and leaving them alone was about to become our only option. Torvax rose from his seat and stood at the edge of the platform. His eyes seemed distant, as if he was looking at something far away in both space and time. 2 years into the war, our leaders made a decision, he said. They had grown tired of the slow, painful fighting on human worlds. They had grown tired of losing ships and soldiers to an enemy that should have been beaten long ago. They decided to end the war with a single massive strike. The hologram appeared again, showing a star map with a cluster of dots marking human territory. The target was Proxima Centauri. It was humanity's second largest colony system, home to almost 3 billion people. Our leaders believed that if we could destroy or capture this system, the humans would finally understand that they could not win. They would finally surrender. Torvax gestured at the map. The hegemony gathered its reserve fleets. Ships from a dozen sectors, the finest vessels we had, crews that had never tasted defeat. 140 warships, the largest fleet assembled in a generation. Against them, the humans had perhaps 40 vessels and a handful of orbital defense platforms. He looked at the cadets. Our commanders were certain of victory. The numbers were overwhelming. The humans could not possibly stand against such force. This would be the final battle of the war. Torvax made that bitter laughing sound. I was assigned to the cruiser Velkrath, part of the 3rd Assault Wave. I remember standing on the observation deck as we entered the system, watching the stars blur and shift as we dropped out of faster-than-light travel. I remember seeing the human fleet waiting for us. Their ships so small and few compared to our mighty. Armada, the hologram, shifted to show the 2 fleets facing each other. Across the darkness of space, the human flagship was a battlecruiser called the Defiant Hope. It was an old ship, scarred from years of fighting, held together with repairs and determination. Its commander was a man named Admiral Benjamin Hart. Torvax paused. By that point in the war, everyone knew the name Benjamin Hart. He had fought in a dozen battles and won most of them. He had pulled off victories that our analysts said were impossible. Some of our soldiers believed he could not be killed, that he had made some kind of deal with the dark forces of the universe. He shook his head. He was just a man. But he was a man who understood war better than anyone I have ever encountered. Not the theory of war, not the mathematics of fleet movements and supply lines, but the heart of war. He understood what made soldiers fight and what made them break. He understood how to take weakness and turn it into strength. The hologram showed the opening moments of the battle, with the two fleets moving toward each other. Our commander, High Admiral Zethron, ordered a standard attack formation. We would sweep forward in waves, overwhelming the human defenses with sheer numbers. It was a simple plan, one that had worked many times before against many enemies. Torvax's voice grew tense. The first surprise came almost immediately. As our ships moved into attack position, hidden weapons began firing from the asteroid fields that surrounded the system. The humans had spent months preparing for us. They had placed gun platforms on hundreds of asteroids, hidden so well that our sensors never detected them. The hologram showed hegemony ships exploding as missiles and energy beams struck them from unexpected angles. But that was only the beginning. Some of our ships that had been scouting ahead suddenly turned and opened fire on their own fleet. The humans had disguised freighters and cargo ships as our own vessels. They had been hiding among our fleet since we entered the system, waiting for the right moment to strike. Several cadets made sounds of disbelief. Torvax nodded grimly. 12 ships, 12 vessels that we thought were ours, were actually human. They destroyed or damaged almost 30 of our warships before we realized what was happening. And while we were trying to deal with this chaos, the real human fleet attacked. The old veteran began pacing, his movements sharp with remembered tension. Admiral Hart did not fight the way we expected. Instead of holding his position and waiting for our attack, he charged directly at our main battle line. His ships were faster than ours, and he used that speed to create confusion. He would strike at one point, then pull back before we could respond, only to attack somewhere else. Torvax stopped and faced the cadets. But his true genius was psychological. Hart understood that we had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice everything for victory. He used that against us. The hologram showed a human cruiser accelerating toward a hegemony battleship. I watched a human cruiser, damaged and burning, ram directly into our command ship. The crew had evacuated at the last moment, escaping in small shuttles while their vessel became a weapon. The impact destroyed both ships. Torvax's voice dropped. This happened again and again. Human pilots flew suicide runs, not because they wanted to die, but because they knew their sacrifice would open holes in our formation for other ships to exploit. They turned their own destruction into a tactical advantage. He continued, "One moment stays with me above all others. A group of human fighters was cut off from their main fleet, surrounded by our ships. They had no chance of survival. Any sensible commander would have surrendered." Torvax paused. Instead, they attacked our flagship. Not to win, but to force us to defend ourselves. While our command ship was dealing with these suicidal fighters, Admiral Hart led his main force through a gap in our lines and struck our supply ships. In one move, he destroyed half our fuel reserves. The cadets were completely still. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting, explosions, death, and chaos. I saw things I will never forget. Human ships burning as they continued to fire their weapons. Human pilots ejecting from destroyed fighters and being picked up by rescue shuttles, only to return to the battle in new vessels hours later. Human crews sealing damaged sections of their ships and continuing to fight, even as their vessels broke apart around them. Torvax sat down, his old body suddenly looking very tired. On the third day, High Admiral Zethron ordered a retreat. We had lost more than 100 ships. The rest were damaged, low on fuel, exhausted. The largest fleet in hegemony history had been broken by an enemy we had outnumbered 3-1. He looked at his mechanical arm. I lost my arm in that battle. A piece of debris from an exploding ship tore through our hull and took it from me. I was lucky. Many of my friends were not. They died in the cold darkness of space, killed by an enemy they had been told was weak and primitive. Torvax was quiet for a moment. As our surviving ships limped away from the system, Admiral Hart sent us a message. I remember his words exactly, because they haunted my dreams for years afterward. He looked up at the cadets. He said, "Go home. Tell your leaders what you saw here today. Tell them what happens next if they send another fleet. Tell them that we did not ask for this war, but we will finish it. And then tell them this: we are not monsters. We do not want to destroy you, but we will do whatever we must to protect our people. The choice is yours." Torvax spread his arms. Admiral Hart had lost half his fleet in that battle. His ships were damaged, his crews exhausted, his resources nearly gone. By any normal measure, we should have won. We had more ships remaining than he did. He lowered his arms. But he knew something our commanders did not. He knew that we were broken in ways that had nothing to do with numbers. Our confidence was shattered. Our belief in our own superiority was destroyed. We had seen what humans could do when they fought without limits, and we were terrified. Torvax stood up again. The hegemony never sent another fleet to Proxima Centauri. Within months, our leaders were seeking peace. Not because they wanted peace, but because they finally understood that victory against the humans would cost more than any prize was worth. He looked at each cadet in turn. Remember this lesson, young ones. Numbers are not everything. Technology is not everything. Sometimes, the side that is willing to pay the higher price is the side that wins. The humans were willing to pay any price. We were not. Torvax paused. And that is why the hegemony, the greatest military power in the known galaxy, made peace with a species that had been traveling between stars for less than a century. The gathering hall had grown colder as Torvax spoke, or perhaps it only felt that way. The young cadets sat in silence, their earlier pride completely gone. They looked smaller now, younger, as if the weight of Torvax's stories had pressed them down into their seats. Torvax stood at the center of the platform, his scarred body still, his amber eyes moving slowly across the faces before him. "The war ended in the 3rd year," he said. "Our leaders had finally accepted what those of us who had fought already knew. The humans could not be conquered, not without losses so great that the hegemony itself would be weakened beyond recovery." He walked slowly to the edge of the platform. Peace negotiations began on a neutral station between our territories. I was assigned to the security detail, so I was there when the human delegation arrived. I expected warriors, hard-faced soldiers like Admiral Hart and the fighters I had faced in battle. Torvax paused. Instead, they sent diplomats. Ordinary-looking people in simple clothes, carrying nothing but data pads and translation devices. They smiled and spoke politely and behaved as if they had not just fought a war that killed millions on both sides. He shook his head slowly. The leader of their delegation was a woman named Grace Patterson. She was perhaps 50 years old, small and thin, with gray hair and tired eyes. She did not look like someone who could frighten anyone. But when she walked into the negotiation room, even our admirals grew quiet. The hologram appeared one final time, showing a middle-aged human woman with a kind face and steady gaze. I learned later that Grace Patterson had lost her husband and 2 sons in the war. Her husband had died at Kepler Station, fighting alongside Lieutenant Katie Morgan. Her older son had been killed on New Montana. In the same battle where we captured Marcus Cole, her younger son had died at Proxima Centauri, aboard one of the ships that rammed our command vessel. Torvax's voice grew soft. She had every reason to hate us. She had every reason to demand vengeance, to push for the complete destruction of the hegemony. Our leaders expected this. They had prepared to negotiate from a position of shared hatred, trading pain for pain, territory for territory. He looked at the cadets. Instead, Grace Patterson offered fair terms, reasonable borders, trade agreements, cultural exchange. She proposed a peace that would benefit both sides, that would allow both species to recover and grow. Torvax turned away and was quiet for a long moment. I was guarding the door when the first session ended. The negotiators filed out, and as Grace Patterson passed me, she stopped. She looked up at my face, at the scars that marked my years of fighting her people, and she asked if I had been at Kepler Station. His voice grew rough. I told her yes. I expected anger, hatred, perhaps an attack. Instead, she simply nodded and said that her husband had spoken of a Cathare soldier who had shown mercy to wounded prisoners after the fighting ended. She asked if that had been me. Torvax touched the scar on his chest. It had been. After the station fell, I found a group of injured humans in a storage room. They were dying, all of them, but they had refused to surrender. My commanding officer ordered me to execute them. I told him they were already dead, and that wasting ammunition on corpses was inefficient. Then I walked away and let the medical teams take them. He turned back to the cadets. Grace Patterson thanked me for that small act of mercy. She said that one of those wounded humans had survived, and that he had told her the story. Then she asked me a question that I have never forgotten. Torvax's amber eyes seemed to glow. She asked me why the hegemony had started this war. What had the humans done to threaten us? What had they taken from us? What had they done to deserve invasion and death and destruction? His voice dropped. I had no answer. I had never thought about it. I had been a soldier, following orders, doing my duty. The reasons for the war had never mattered to me. I had simply assumed that our leaders had good reasons, that the humans must have done something to deserve what we did to them. Torvax was quiet for a moment. Grace Patterson saw my confusion. She nodded sadly, as if she had expected it. Then she said something that changed the way I understood the entire war. He looked at the cadets. She said that humans were not naturally warlike. They had art and music and poetry. They had families and dreams and hopes for the future. They had spent centuries learning how to live in peace with each other, overcoming their own violent history through patience and effort and sacrifice. Torvax's voice grew heavy. But when they were attacked, when their homes were threatened and their families were in danger, they became something else. They became the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they wanted to be, but because they had to be. War was not their nature. It was their response to threats. And when they responded, they held nothing back. He walked to the edge of the platform. I asked Grace Patterson why, after everything we had done to her people and to her family, she was offering us peace instead of demanding vengeance. Torvax paused. She said, because we are not finished growing yet. And neither are you. War makes us strong, but peace makes us wise. We would rather have wise neighbors than weak enemies. The old veteran looked down at his mechanical arm. I have thought about those words every day since. I have watched the peace that she helped build grow stronger over the years. I have seen human and Cathari ships flying together on joint missions. I have seen human doctors treating our sick and our engineers learning from human scientists. I have seen the children of former enemies becoming friends. Torvax looked up at the cadets. Grace Patterson was right. Peace has made us wiser. We have learned things from the humans that we could never have learned through war. We have grown in ways that conquest could never have achieved. And the humans have grown too, becoming part of the galactic community, sharing their strange and wonderful culture with species across 1,000 stars. He walked to the center of the platform one last time. But I want you to remember something. The humans chose peace. They could have chosen differently. After Proxima Centauri, they could have pushed their advantage. They could have attacked our weakened fleets, invaded our colonies, taken revenge for everything we had done to them. Torvax's voice grew serious. They did not do this because they are kind. They did not do this because they are weak. They did this because they are wise. They understood that eternal war would destroy both our species. And they chose a different path. He raised one arm and pointed at the cadets. But never make the mistake of thinking that their kindness means they are harmless. Never think that their preference for peace means they cannot fight. The humans I faced in battle were the most terrifying enemies I have ever encountered. And those humans are still there, beneath the surface. If we ever threaten them again, if we ever give them a reason to become warriors once more, we will see them return. Torvax lowered his arm. That is the lesson I have come to teach you today. Not how to defeat the humans, because they cannot be defeated. Not how to survive against them, because survival depends on their mercy. The lesson is simply this: never fight the humans. He began walking toward the exit. Not because you cannot win, though you cannot. Not because they are stronger, though they are. Fight them, and you will see what they become when they have nothing left to lose. You will see the most terrifying thing in the universe. Torvax stopped at the door and looked back at the cadets. You will see what happens when humans decide to stop being kind. He stood there for a moment, letting his final words hang in the cold air of the gathering hall. Then he turned and walked out, his mechanical arm clicking softly with each step, leaving the young cadets to sit in silence and think about the stories they had heard. Behind him, the instructor Velkath rose slowly and looked at his students. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. The confidence they had carried into this room was gone, replaced by something deeper and more valuable: understanding, and perhaps just a little bit of healthy fear. The lesson was complete.